Hey, it's Chris. As always, one of my favorite videos of the month. Don't back anything. That's right. Why you should not back anything on crowdfunding right now. I'm going to run you through all of the biggest projects that are on crowdfunding and tell you why you should not logistically, logically, emotionally back any of them. Again, not to tell you shouldn't support publishers and not to tell you that you can't get more games, but say, hey, you know what? FOMO timeout, T for timeout. You don't need to get it for this reasons. And you know what? As always, if you're okay with those reasons and those aren't make it or break it for you, go ahead and do it. You know, you're anything like me. When you're looking at a game, the whole reason I do this video is when you look at a game online, like I go on to Board Game Geek and I click the comment section and I look for the negatives, right? I look for the negatives because I look at those negatives and then I go, if I'm okay with those negatives, well, then I'm probably really going to like this game. And so that's what I hope this video does for you in a nutshell, is say, you know what, Chris, I hear your concerns, and you know what, those aren't issues for me. I'm okay with those issues, or I'm okay with the way that this is going money-wise, or presentation-wise, or funding, or whatever it may be, right? And then it's even more of a good feeling that you're getting in then at that point. Now, side note here at the beginning, though, I'm going to expand this. I'm going to talk about a little bit of retail, not in this video, though, in future videos, so that I can give you a don't buy this at retail and tell you the same thing, except on that side rather than just purely crowdfunding. Like that idea? I like that idea. Let's go. Okay, we're going to start with some of the newer stuff here at the beginning. Perch, Inside Up Games. Do you like area control? Good. Do you have 3 to 5 players to play with this consistently? No? Well, you shouldn't get this game because it's got a 2-player dummy that goes along with it. Not me dummy, but a dummy player. And the thing is, well, it's going to be heavy. Take that, but in a slightly different way, because not only can you place your own pawns, birds in this case, on the areas that you're going to be controlling, you can place other people's because you're just randomly drawing 2 from a bag to go along with the 2 of your own. So you could be placing 4 of your own, you could be placing 2 of your own and 1 from each of the other people that you're playing with. And if you're not enjoying other people manipulating or messing with your stuff, not just in a sense that they take that and knock yours out, but they're going to actively have control over some of your own actual pawns in the first place, this game is going to be a complete and utter pass for you. The other thing you have to know is the scoring for this is going to be completely obtuse in terms of what you're used to, because the scoring is not just person with the most gets the most points. It's going to be maybe on this one you get the most points if you have the most. Maybe you get the most points on this one if you're in 3rd place. Oh, if you tie though, you're all going to lose out on points. And so those are the things that are going to be the make it or break it with this. Inside Up, you know, I've had a little bit of mixed feelings. I've had a lot of, I like this game up here with them, but the practicality of it, block and key, not a big fan of the setup. It's very finicky in terms of getting it to stand well. And then Earth, you know, I love the idea of Earth, but it kind of has overstayed its welcome in terms of the game lengths as I've played it. And so I just have a little bit of trepidatious feeling on this of, will I like it as much as I think I like it based on my own personal, that's what we're talking about, right? I'm not going to put anything else out there on anyone else, my own personal feelings. I think the price is good. $37 is good, but can you get it at a better price at retail? Because that's also what we've seen a little bit of, although some of the exclusives have been a little bit harder on the distributor publisher secondary side of things from the market. And so you've seen a little bit of a markup with, like, say, Earth, for example, but not with block and key. So your mileage is going to vary. Are you looking for a smaller, shorter area control game? That's the other thing. Under an hour. Is that going to be your ilk? Or do you want more of the Blood Rage, Ankh, Rising Sun, which is going to be more a 1.5 to 3 hour game, depending on your, you know, player count and meta that evolves, because this one is also going to be non-meta. If those aren't make it or break it's for you, yeah, go check it out. Next up, Spectral and Sasquatch, because Bitewing Games is coming back with a combo one here. And what do you need to know about this one? Well, Spectral is going to be, again, a little bit of a potentially take that deduction game. Do you like, again, take that with a deduction element when that plays into the end game scoring conditions in terms of when the game is actually going to end, not necessarily the scoring side of things. I don't know why I said that. What you've got going on is you've just got these set of tiles that are just, as it shows you here, point in different directions to tell you where the curses or the treasures are. And if you just have your workers down there on the board next to the curses when it ends, well, you just lose them. And the only ones that score for you are the ones next to the treasures. And you make this 4x4 grid. But there's going to be some randomness, obviously, because the 4x4 grid is going to have rows that are always the same. It's a little bit different. It's not going to be as perfect information as people who really love some of these deduction games may want in addition to that. And so it's going to be quicker potentially than some of these other ones, because the other end game scoring is that just everybody has their workers out there. So that's also there as well. But again, why get it on crowdfunding? You're getting a little bit of an extra promo. So are little promos still make it or break it for you? Nowadays, they aren't for me. You're paying a premium for the small amount of content. So that's fine though. The other thing is on this one, we're seeing Sasquatch, which is this is the big element with this one, right? It's a semi-co-op because one person gets a secret identity potentially of Sasquatch, but you don't know if there's a Sasquatch. So you're always kind of wondering if someone's going to flip over the Sasquatch card and then declare that, hey, you have to close a loop with Sasquatch, otherwise you all lose. Otherwise, you score, at the end of the game and you see how well you do. But that's going to be the issue here. And not that this is bad, because I actually like the idea of this in theory, but you're going to have to buy the base game in order to get this expansion too. It's not a standalone expansion, which again is a blessing or a curse depending on how you feel about that, which means it's going to cost you ultimately probably closer to $50 if you want to get it non-travel sized and with any of the other modular expansions. The other thing that you have to know about this game is this is probably the most AP prone, heaviest route building sort of collection game that I've ever played. And again, personal experience here. Great game, but very, very thinky when it comes to putting these loops together. And that doesn't seem like it's a hard concept, right? With some of these loops that you're making, right? You're just putting these tiles out there. I mean, this GIF makes it look really simple, Chris. I won't lie. There are like 6 different ways that you can place each of these in multiple different locations on every single turn after you draft them from your opponents as you pass them around. And there is just so much consideration that has to go into that on every single time. And so if you are not inclined to be thinking through that very slowly, thoroughly, and deeply every single round, this game is going to go by very quickly and you're not going to get the full experience. And so if that's not you, go get something else. Go get something else. And that's okay. But that's what you need to know, because it is not as simplistic and cute as it may appear on surface value. It is much deeper, heavier, and more strategic, which is why also, it's got all the golden reviews from love and everything down here on the videos that are on the page. And, for good reason. But you need to get the game that's right for you. And if this is not your style, again, don't get it. So there you go. Next up, Joyride, Survival of the Fastest. Again, I'm shocked that this thing is getting as much money as it is, because the big issue that I have is right now, they just broke their first stretch goal at the time of me filming this at 40,000 pounds. And the stretch goals are locked behind a pledge level of 50 pounds difference, or is it? Yeah, 50 pounds difference between the full core game and the higher level. There are no other levels that get you the stretch goals. There's a 2-player independent game, dueling, if you will, that I'm not sure why you would buy unless you're really, really in search of this and can't get it elsewhere in the secondary market later. And even the base game right now, it doesn't seem like it's that good of a deal, because you're paying $64 before shipping. It's probably going to be at least $15 for shipping. So you're getting $80 of a game that's not getting any add-ons, any exclusivity, any benefit of backing it on crowdfunding. So I don't even know why you have people at these lower levels right now, to be completely honest with you. And they're, again, pledge locking stretch goals behind 50 pounds. $64, essentially, almost. That's a ton of money for stretch goals. But at the beginning of this, the stretch goals were these 2 extra maps and an extra sheet, or an extra ability car guy right here. Yeah, those 2 maps. There's now 3 of these unlocked, but is that going to be enough to entice you? Is that $64 worth of content? $64 worth of content comparatively is like the stretch goal box for a CMON campaign, right? That's, again, comparatively apples to oranges, but take that for what you will, because this is also a combination of sort of the racing pit games, the motocross ones, I forget the name of them, where you're shifting through the gears. The one that had trouble delivering, or that wasn't going to be delivered from Holy Grail, I'm completely blanking on that one. But that in combination with like a heat pedal for the metal, as well as like the previously now having trouble production wise, but is maybe going to come eventually, Impulse, where you've got just modular tracks, modular cars, shifting, turning, take that as well. And again, this is a take that style of race game, not a, heat pedal to the metal, lap them, pass them, outplay them as well. It's more a little bit of a Thunder Road Vendetta style in that aspect. And if you're going to get something like that, are you almost better off going with Thunder Road Vendetta, which has right now relatively good acclaim and people seem to be really liking in the first place? So why would I get this over that right now? The question you got to ask yourself, why not we go with one of the proven ones that, you can already see as much as you want about and get as much information, even though some of them obviously are a little bit harder to get if you're looking for the Kickstarter copy or heat being between print runs right now. So there you go. Marrakesh here. Let's talk about Marrakesh. This is coming from Queen Games. We've seen the Essential, we've seen the Classic, we've seen the Deluxe Edition. Now, the Essential is is from Devere. The very interesting, weird thing about this campaign is they're essentially giving you both the versions that are going to be compatible with the Classic as well as the Essential Edition from both of those two companies that have been previously put out. And I don't know why you would, and again, maybe I'm interpreting this completely wrong on here, and I hope I am. Why would you want both of them? Why would you ever want to pay extra for both of them? Because you don't own the Classic and the Essential Edition, do you? That's the only issue. I don't understand why you're going to be getting what you're going to get, and that's essentially my concern, right? And maybe I'm interpreting this wrong. Maybe I'm having a hard time understanding this graphic, right? It says that this expansion is 100% compatible with all editions, which if I'm interpreting that, that means that you're including the stuff that needs to be compatible with both expansions in one box, which means that you're paying for both editions. But if you only have obviously one edition, why would I want to pay for the other edition's components that I don't have? Because if you go down here, the lowest level here is $55 for the deluxe Marrakesh owner. There's nothing lower than that, folks. The $75 one gets you the solo mode and extras as well. So if you have the deluxe edition or just the essential edition, I guess, from Devere, why would you buy this? Can you wait for the Essential Edition just to come for retail? Why would I pay $55 plus shipping is, again, another $15 or so averaged out? Why would I pay $70 for this for the Essential Edition that I have that's compatible later at the retail side of things? And if it's deluxe, do I really need it? And again, this game has been hard to get on the secondary market at the Queen levels in the first place. And it's, I will say, been probably the most well-received overall, or gotten the most rumblings of all of the Feldian Point Salad extravaganzas from Queen's foray into the 6 cities that they now have redone and remastered, even though this one was not a remastery in the first place. And they're really focusing on this. So take that for what you will. They definitely jacked their prices up when they stopped going through regular retail distribution and only selling their web shop now. So you can't guarantee that you're going to get it anytime soon. But do you love this game enough to have that much more point salad to go along with it? And most of the Feldian games, the argument probably from the get-go, because you only play games once or twice before you move on to the next thing anyway, are going to be no. Haha, talking about myself there in the comment section. Not you guys whatsoever by any means at all, right? Just totally myself. So what else are we talking about here? We're talking about Bear Mountain Camping Adventure, A Race to the Top. Again, like, this is one of those games, I think everyone's kind of going on crowdfunding right now. How is this getting over $500,000? Like, what is the mass appeal? I feel like this is one of those very early tiny epic series games where what we saw, at least in my opinion from an outsider's perspective, was that people saw that something was doing really well and they said, what am I missing out? What am I missing out? I better get in on this. This is, looking like it's something in the making that's going to be awesome. And then, it was kind of okay, and they were okay with it, and it was kind of hit or miss, and they just kind of went on the ride and got caught up on the excitement and the adventure of the campaign, which a lot of people talk about as being the main reason for wanting to do crowdfunding in the first place. Oh, the campaigns are so fun and engaging. That's not a reason to spend, $50 to $100, folks. The experience, not worth it. Not worth it, in my opinion, but not worth it. Go spend that money elsewhere to get a different experience. And it's a relatively straightforward game, right? You're playing these cards, you're moving along routes, you're trying to camp in various locations, making your way up colored sections of the mountain, trying to be the first one to the top. And it's a little bit of a set collection style game with just, straightforward mechanisms. And the artwork is beautiful. But from a gameplay standpoint, this is probably going to be more in the lines of, I think people are going to compare it, or at least superficially, at least for right now, for me, is Flamecraft, where a lot of people are so enamored with the idea of it and the appearance of it and the aesthetic of it that they're willing to overlook some of the less than perfections in terms of gameplay, in terms of that, right? Again, not saying that there's anything bad about either of these games, right? But if you objectively take a look at like Flamecraft, people do not say Flamecraft is the best worker placement game I played. They do not say it is the best light worker placement game. They say it's a very nice worker placement game. I'm very pleased with it overall, and almost 9 out of 10 times those adjectives then around that, before that, after that, during those sentences are also accumulating compliments about the aesthetic and the dragons and the cuteness and that sort of thing. And this has that in spades as well. And so I think, a very appealing aesthetic in the first place attracts a lot more people just on surface value. And if you price it halfway appropriately at $39, that makes sense. I can see why people are doing it. I can see why they might like the aspect of the dual deck building, but you just got to be careful of whether or not it's actually right for you, rather than it looks kind of cool, right? Because those always get talked about in terms of like the miniatures and the big box games and those sorts of things, like, oh, you're only buying it because you just like the look of miniatures. Well, it happens with these art style games too all the time. And so let's not discount that. Again, nothing wrong with this. This looks like a fine game, but is it going to be one that you're going to play once or twice and be done with, or is it going to be a standing test of time? And that's what you need to be sure of. I say that as someone who enjoys deck building very much so in the first place as well. What else shouldn't you back? Call of Duty. Call of Duty. I have to feel like, and other people were speculating this on Facebook, the things I said when this launched, right? Launched to relatively low fanfare, despite, again, one of the most hyped games I have seen preview and media-wise in the past couple months. This is just lacking something. What is that something that it's lacking? Interest? Intrigue? I don't know. Running right after Apex Legends? Running right after the disaster that's come with Siege 6? It's not like Arcane Wonders doesn't know how to run a campaign. At the same time, you know, there was a lot of same gameplay video that all launched on the same day. But apart from that, it's, you know, kind of had like these $100,000 worth of stretch goals revealed, but not hitting them as well. And they had to shift mid-campaign a la Simon with Trudvang Legends and say, oh, by the way, mid-campaign mass email. Because, you know, I got 3 of those saying that, oh yeah, we're throwing in this new stuff now, like solo mode and a little bit of other junk that's going along with the little extra stretch goals. So, you know, I saw people complaining that it's all because they didn't have streamers of Call of Duty, you know, the PC gamers or the console gamers who are big on the video game side of things checking this out, right? Like, no offense, but I don't think that's the reason board gamers get into a video game. Now, it does get you more cross-mass appeal if you have some of those people. At the same time, again, I don't think that's the vast majority of people doing your Apex Legends or that did your Siege 6, right? And I don't think that even if you had some massive ones doing it here, it would drastically different. Okay, maybe 300, 400, 500, but not 1 million, not 2 million. The real question is, how much did this IP cost, and is this actually sustainable? Now, you know, I almost half expected at the time of me filming this to find that it had canceled here in the very last days. You know, obviously there's still 4 days left for that to be figured out, but is this feasible in the long run if the IP is that much? Are you losing significant amount of money? Because we've seen it with other IPs say the same thing, right? They need a certain amount because of the cost of it in the first place. I mean, I guess what it goes to show you is that you need more than an IP. You need more than previews to get stuff sometimes. You can't just rely solely on those. Or people just really trepidatious now with the recent Siege 6 Mythic failure. I can't help but think that doesn't have some echoes and some remnants of effect here. Is it just falling in the shadow of Apex Legends as well? I can't help but, you know, think that, even though the gameplay is dramatically different. This has Darkest Dungeon to me written all over it, right? Wait for a retail. Wait for retail. Innovation Ultimate, right? I want this game desperately. I would love this game desperately. There is no reason that you should buy this game, because everyone says, if you talk to it about whether or not you're looking at this and being interested in it, go pick up just a copy of the base game for like $5 to $10 from somebody on the secondary market, figure out whether or not you like it, and then go pick up the individual expansions, because again, you're not going to get played through the base game enough, even in like 5 or 10 plays, to justify the expansions. And then you go pick up an expansion after you've played it a dozen or 2 dozen times, and then you'll actually get something new out of it as well. And so do you really need, what, 5 or 6 expansions that this is coming with? If you have the previous edition, I also don't like the fact that they didn't allow you to upgrade. If you have the deluxe previous edition and now you want the ultimate super legendary Saiyan SSJ3 Shadow Instinct, you know, style of things version, if you know where I'm going with anime there, Gear 5, that's what they're looking at with this. And again, I think they've made some good tweaks. I think they've taken some of the errata out. They've made it a little bit smoother. They allow you to get to the later stages a lot easier. They offer a better mode with more players, but I don't really want to pay another $100 for a game. You know, I paid almost $100 for it to get on the secondary market previously because you didn't put it out at retail. And that isn't dramatically different than the other stuff I already mentioned that you can get from the other earlier versions. Slight tweaking, you know, is good, but it's not $100 good. So I'd love to, again, maybe potentially trade, or, you know, if in the next, 29 days, I sell my copy of the previous for $50 or $75, and I can justify then, paying, what is it, $69 here plus probably $20 shipping, I guess. But that's what I'd have to do, and I'm not really sure I want to mess with it either. So that's, something to think about if you're looking at this as someone like myself. Thunderstone Quest, AEG. Again, when I covered this originally when it launched, I said, Thunderstone Quest, I don't know why I would get this, right? Like, completionist in me is probably the only reason I would be getting this. There are too sparse of details on the campaign page when it launched in the first place to know exactly what these mechanisms in the Raging Seas and Ancient Adversaries, I almost said Ancient Adventurers, expansions are giving you. And I sort of, give AEG some flack here about this, because you know how to run a campaign. You've run plenty of other campaigns with plenty of other content, and this one just seems to be riding the coattails of some of the first ones where you've said, okay, this is Thunderstone Quest. You know what you're getting with Thunderstone Quest, so we're not going to tell you anything new. It's just buy it because you want more of it. And Thunderstone Quest is a great game, but the issue with Thunderstone Quest is also it's a huge, massive Millennium Blade setup and teardown issue. And that's the problem with it in a nutshell. And so if you add more stuff that you're having to sort through, organize, compare, contrast, break down, set up, that's not insignificant. And so it has sort of saturated the market. I mean, what this is, expansions like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, something along those lines, where you're easily in double digits, and all of them are, again, not just a one playthrough style of expansion. They're a multi-play beneficial game with the base game in the first place, let alone the dozen expansions plus now that you can get as a whole. The expansions are okay priced. They price them for about $40 at retail. They price them for about like $30 here on the crowdfunding campaign. But again, you have to be aware that shipping is going to eat away at that cost savings, so it's not going to be terribly different. With AEG, I mean, they just had a huge sale in the spring where they basically had almost everything under the sun for like 40 to 50% off on a various day throughout whatever it was, like March or April. And I picked up their Rolling Heights Kickstarter for, shipped less than the price of the base pledge for the crowdfunding campaign before shipping. And so if I see that, now, I haven't seen a bunch of the Thunderstone Quest on those sales as well, but a lot of their other non-Thunderstone Quests have been, or were under that as well. And so that's just the other thing I have to think about is, again, from a consumer standpoint, from a backer standpoint, from if I want to get games that if you're really concerned about saving $5 or $10 here or there, this is potentially a campaign that you could get up or get down later without missing out too much. But that's also the question. Have you played through all your other Thunderstone Quest stuff? Have you? If you're buying these expansions, or is this the expansion that you really want to get over all of them? Because that's the other thing, right? There's no real, I need to get this one because it's better or worse. They just don't give you enough information to even say one way or the other. They highlight basic what the idea of the mechanism is, but that's about it. And yeah, do you need all of it? $500 for that. This better be hitting the table like 2 or 3 times a month if you have that much content. Just saying, speaking from experience. Don't have all of it, but I got like the first 6 or 8, so, fool me once, the saying. Ascendancy, 4X meets worker placement. I'm not sure if it's going to be right before or right after this video is going to air. I'm going to have my thoughts out on Ascendancy and the prototype and what it's bringing to the table. It's definitely got the 4X vibe. It's definitely got the worker placement vibe. It's going to give you a different experience. The tech trees are unique. They're asymmetric, but I also worry about a little min-maxing depending on how your play style is, if that's your ilk of trying to do. It's got cooperative, it's got competitive, it's got solo mode. Again, more fleshed out than I expected, but it's also going to be a little bit longer at the higher player counts. This is not going to be a most optimal game at 4 players. It's just not. You're going to get your bang for your buck, definitely, but it's going to be a lot longer playtime because of how you place the workers every single round, of placing one by one by one by one and having 4 different areas in which you can place them, which is going to lead to some AP, because it's also going to affect not only where you place them out there on the individual boards of the spots, but then it also affects what you're doing on your own individual board back and forth. And so I think it's got a cool concept. I can't say that there's anything terribly else out there like it. It reminds me more, the closest thing I can kind of compare it to is a combination of Dwellings of Elderville meets Uprising Curse of the Last Emperor. And so those are 2 very unique games that are not necessarily simulated or replicated elsewhere. But do you want that? Now, again, the other benefit of this is, unlike some of the other games in this line, this is not like a campaign legacy. You have those elements, you can include those elements, but you can also play one-off scenarios, especially if you don't give a rat's toot about spoilers. And it's an interesting test of the market. And I'm not sure, again, what's it going to look like at retail? That's going to be the big question. $100 though. Is it worth $100 for a bigger scope expanding game? I mean, and that's the other comparison where I'd say very true to Dwellings and Curse. And it's going to have a larger overhead. It's going to have a larger learning curve. It's going to have more that's going to be gained by repeated play. And so is that going to be what you're doing and getting out of this? If not, maybe you're better off going with some other non-legacy worker placement style game, or some truly fully expansive 4X game, right? Because the problem with a game like this that sometimes combines two mechanisms is, if you're really a purist fan of one of those mechanisms, right, then you're probably not going to get the full experience, right? Because you're mishmashing them together, and so you're going to lose out on a little bit on one end, a little bit on the other, right? It's definitely not true 4X in that sense, where you're really having as much as you may want, like in terms of Eclipse or Twilight Imperium, of the Expanse and the Conquer, right? Those are slightly dampened, but that's also why the playtime is a little bit shorter than those games in the first place. You're trading off one way or the other. And then also, it's not going to be quite as heavy worker placement, although they do mitigate that. There is a dummy player at the lower player counts that can kind of mitigate things. As also an AI enemy system. It's just, how do you feel about that? It's got some uniqueness, it's got asymmetry, but you need to like this style of things. And because it's a new combination of things, as we saw with Dune Imperium, as we saw Adventure Realms, as we saw Lost Ruins of Arnak, is it actually going to be a combination of mechanisms that you enjoy? And because it's so new, you probably don't know. And if you don't know, what do I usually say on crowdfunding? If you're guessing at all whether or not you're going to like it, the answer is you don't back it, right? You pick it up on retail later from the publisher, or you trade for it. I just traded for 2 games right now that I wanted that I didn't get on crowdfunding recently or retail. So, practice what you preach as well. That's Ascendancy. Mistwind. This has got a lot of hype. People are really hyping this one up for a 4-round pick up and deliver, whale riding, krill eating game. And so I'm just not sure what to make of it. Again, it's going to be very interesting to see kind of what this one does at retail, because this is, again, a big price point for a game. You're talking over $100, including shipping here, for a 4-round pick up and deliver style of game. And I feel like pick up and deliver is a highly underrated, underutilized, but also just not really enjoyed by as many people as I feel like it necessarily is comparatively to other mechanisms. And again, maybe that's me speaking with my own bias here, and you guys can let me know how wrong I am in the comment section. Like, Chris, we love pick up and deliver, right? But, when you think of the top 100 games on Board Game Geek, how many are pick up and deliver style games? Just saying. So I think the main key that where I'm going with this is, do you love pick up and deliver, right? This is probably not the game to say, hey, I wonder if I really like pick up and deliver. Let me experiment with $120 worth of game, right? No, you go buy something cheaper at retail. You go play something at game night. You don't back this one to find out whether or not you like a mechanism for this price. Period. Especially when you've got the deluxeifications. It's unique. All the people are saying that. No one's going to argue that. It's doing something slightly different in this mechanism. But again, just like we talked about with Ascendancy, are you going to like the variants? Even if you like pick up and deliver, is this going to be of your preferred style of pick up and deliver, right? Because you can still have plenty of variant within a mechanism, as we've seen and as we've already talked about within this video in and of itself. That's the question you have to ask yourself. Is it worth it from that standpoint? Do you like the mixing and matching of the numbered system, where potentially, again, sort of a worker placement element in a numbered action system instead, where, if somebody else has already placed their number on the action I want on the side of the board I want, well, I'm just kind of SOL and I'm going to have to do something else, which again is very tactical, but can also get in the way of your planning from a strategic standpoint. So is that going to be a make it or break it for you as well as you play these discs turn by turn? Is this a game where, retail with cardboard chits is a make it or break it, as opposed to having some of these 3D transports? It's deluxe. Do you want to pay deluxe? Ultimately, that's what you got to ask yourself. There you go. Tiny laser heist. It's a gimmick. And again, I say that as not a bad thing, just a statement of fact. Do you like gimmicks? This is going to be heavy dexterity with pushing these little hands to grab little suitcases and move them around. Is it a novelty? Is it a gimmick? Is it a long-standing game that you're going to keep in your collection? I've had a couple of those games. 1 or 2 of them have stayed around. The rest of them, it's kind of like, oh, this is really kind of cool once or twice. And I'm looking at a game like Cuphead, where you're rolling the dice and you're stacking the dice and you have to roll the dice and stack them a different way and roll them and kind of, do this fun, crazy stuff. And then, you play it and you're done, and you play it and, you kind of got to do it again. It becomes more necessarily burdensome in terms of some of the pressure and some of the uniqueness, rather than a fresh enjoyment every single time. And again, I'm speaking for own personal experience. But that's the sort of thing I wonder with this style of game. Is it actually going to hold up and last the test of time? I mean, I just talked about block and key earlier, right? With the two different levels where you're trying to, like, you know, match them and eye line it, right? It works well in terms of like the thought process behind it and like the pictures and the stills and that. But when you get to the gameplay side of things, it's so delicate. It's so tricky to actually get set up a little bit sometimes in the first place that it kind of takes away some of the enjoyment of doing it after all. And so that's the only thing that I wonder, especially when you look at these pictures and you look at these GIFs of how many people are actually just watching on and how many people are actually playing. And so are you okay with just sort of sitting along the side of a dexterity game as opposed to being the one that plays it? Yeah, I mean, you're going to be affecting things. You're going to be working together, having little different roles and trying to do the heist and the job and all of those things that are going to go along with it. But how much active play is there as the player versus how much active play is there as the group? And so the active player, obviously moving those little hands, is going to have a ton, but if you're not the active player, are you really going to have as much as you may like for the experience? Yeah, it's going to be an experience, but is it going to be a hands-on, haha, hands, pun, anyway, experience for you as a whole? $50, I mean, that's fine. If you want the expansion that goes with it, tiny laser full expansion as well, take that for what you will, but that's what you got to think about because this is a dexterity game, and do you like dexterity games in the first place? Again, this isn't going to be the one that convert you, so you really have to like that style as well. Algomancy. Do you want Magic the Gathering all rolled into one? Do you like card drafting, mage dueling games? Me personally, I love the idea of this game, but my fear is that especially when you have the higher player counts and they talk about having teams and going back and forth and the combat in terms of how you're going to have these lanes that are going to go across and you can block the whole lane as long as you have somebody in front of it. Like, how well are you going to mitigate that? Because you're drafting within the game itself, intra-game drafting, not Magic the Gathering cube drafting, you know, before the game or pack opening drafting, that style of things. But you're going back and forth in the game, trying to decide things and seeing how it goes. And again, I look at this player count and I go 2 to 10. No, I mean, this is a 1 versus 1 game, primarily. You're going to primarily play this game 1 versus 1, maybe 2 versus 2. Some of the actions that you're taking are slightly different than Magic the Gathering, but mechanistically, is it terribly different from some of the others that are out there? And the answer is kind of yes and kind of no. It's got some beautiful aesthetic, but is aesthetic going to be the thing that pulls you in a self-contained Magic the Gathering intra-draft style game? Very creative concept, but is the actual what you're doing during the game, how are these cards interacting, how are they taking each other out, that is going to be what sets it apart. And you know, there's not as much information on this page to tell you that style of things. There's rulebook, there's a couple examples, there's a how to play, but there's not like, okay, here's a bunch of what the cards look like, here's a bunch of the flow of, you know, actual gameplay content so you can see. And so that'd be my only fear with this style of game as a whole. Interesting concept. But, you know, these mage dueling games are tricky. Either they're Magic the Gathering or just head-to-head. And it's hard to tell sometimes on crowdfunding which ones are going to be the ones that really stand out, like Pagan, Fate of Roanoke, or Wizards of Grimoire, versus, you know, the others that have come out in between, or so with a dozen or 2 dozen that you've also seen me cover on the weekly crowdfunding roundup. So right now, I mean, it looks like a solid product, but I think time is going to be the best way to tell. So unless you're in love with it, maybe wait and see and pick it up later. Let's talk about Midhalla for a second. Midhalla, tower defense, campaign, individual scenarios, sort of a dungeon crawl, if you will. Self-contained dungeons, a little bit different aspect. They're playing more off the Gloomhaven style of things, where it's much less random and much more controlled in terms of the combat. So if that's what you like, this one is one to look at. Now, if you're a chaos controlling, dice curious person like I am as well, you know, that's not going to be much of your experience here. It's going to be less D&D in that style and more Gloomhaven. And Gloomhaven is a little bit of a harder barrier to entry for a lot of people, even Jaws of the Lion, to get into, get fully engaged and get played through. And that'd be the other concern here. So is it going to be your ilk where you're sort of tower defending in terms of protecting a gate and not letting the demons destroy the gate before the end of the round, and you're only doing this, what, like 3 rounds every single battle? So that's nice, but it's also not going to be a protracted, prolonged course. So you really gotta, you know, cut swiftly and use a scalpel to go and get things done immediately. The 4 phases that this runs through of every single scenario is also very unique because it completely separates them out. There's not a whole lot of intermixing. It's just boom, 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 boom. Is that interesting to you? Now, again, the other thing I have to say is it's a little bit more expensive because it's about a $100 price point to get in. And I worry that just with the pictures of the miniatures on here, they aren't, you know, necessarily probably your Simon, your Awakened Realm style of things. and you're paying a little bit of premium for, you know, those style of miniatures. Is that worth it for you? Is it worth it if this was standees and $20 less? Again, no one buys standees, Chris, on crowdfunding. You're barking up the wrong tree. I know I am, but I'm still gonna say it because it's a lower cost point. And speaking of Uprising, Curse of the Last Emperor, right? You know, trying to buck the trend is okay, because I'd rather have, you know, sometimes really good standees than very nondescript Destiny's style miniatures. That's my fear. Again, those are probably just renders, probably not going to look anything like that, but that's what I want out of miniatures, right? I want the Simon Awakened Realms. I don't want the Destinies. And that's just the issue that you run into with something like this, where you can't exactly tell from the beginning. Do you want the expansion? It goes along with it. And they're going to unlock some stretch goals, a little bit of gameplay content, and a little bit of deluxifications. So they run you through. It's all on here on the page. You get some campaign, you get some unlocks, you get some, you know, scenario-driven goodness in terms of stories and events. So do you want more story and event? Do you have too much story and event? I mean, this is looking like it's somewhere in the middle. So if you're not super strong on it, yeah, this might appeal to you. If you don't want any whatsoever, again, this one might fall outside the range as well. So we'll see where it goes. Viking theme, at least. That's something different. It's not Cthulhu or zombies, so take that for what you will. Fool's Blade, $400,000. I have no clue how this is getting $400,000. It's a very simple warlike game where you're drafting, and some of the cards are going to give you different dice to roll based on what cards you have and what combinations of cards you have. I believe it's based off of like a webcomic. And so I think that's where a lot of the backing and the support comes, but it's not going to be your most mechanically deep game in the first place. You're going to be mixing and matching these weapons, going on quests, and just drawing cards to be able to slay the monsters based on the dice you roll to do damage. And obviously the more powerful you are, the better dice you get to roll, which allows you to win easier. And that's the game sort of in a nutshell. I mean, it's got a cool aesthetic, again, cool little sword box. How easy is that to fit on a shelf though sometimes? That's kind of the practicality, I wonder. It's a cool aesthetic, but does it work in practicality? Who cares, right, Chris? You're talking about crowdfunding on YouTube. No one cares about practicality on that side of things. Full game expansion pack. I mean, the price is fine. It's $40. But it's very much like the Unstable Unicorns style of thing here, where you've got this extra add-ons for extra money. You want something light, you want a casting shadows in a different way. That's what it's going for here, in a slightly different mechanistic approach. And lesser price on the other end of things doesn't mean it's a better deal, or it doesn't mean that you're going to play it more, because you see all the time people picking up like 3 or 4 of these $20 games. Well, how many of those actually get played, or how many of those stay in your collection? Very few, and you don't want that to be this case either. Let's go over to Game Found. Vampire, Milan Uprising, T-Brew system. The big question, I think, with this one is, what's going on with the T-Brew system? The first game from this company is not even out yet, so you don't even know how T-Brew is going to work. You don't know if T-Brew is going to be consistent. You don't know if you're going to like T-Brew. And so I really have a hard time endorsing going for the second game that's based on a system that the first game isn't even out yet for. And not just the first game, but the system itself. And so if you're not sure what the future of the system is going to be, I mean, that makes me a little bit worried. Because you essentially have to buy the system, then you have to buy the game. It's sort of like, you know, buying the Nintendo Switch, right? You have to like the games that are on the Nintendo Switch to buy, you know, the system in the first place. If you don't like the games that are on there, well, you know, you can get the system, but it's not going to work out the way you want it to, and vice versa. And so it's got over $500,000, which is incredible. But again, this is a scenario-driven, story-based computer situation. And do you want an app driving the majority of your gameplay content? And that's what you have to ask yourself in this. I know apps are very controversial. I have no problem with them in general, but when you're taking more app and less actual game, that's where I start to say, okay, how much of this is more like a video game? Obviously, then if they're doing some of the upkeep, the tear down, the keeping track of things, that's nice. But, you know, as someone who's got enough of those games in the first place, electronic or not, I don't know how many more of those I want as well. Deluxe, deluxe, deluxe. Do you want it? But again, like they emphasize right here, this is going to be a big narrative experience with a crawl feel on top of it, not the other way around. So if you want more of the crawl, this one might be an easy pass for you as well. Kind of got to wait and see if you're going to like this whole T-Brew system in the first place. And that'd probably be, again, going back to the beginning, the biggest caveat that I'd say is, if you don't already love the idea of this T-Brew system of an electronic app-based system controlling the vast majority of things and upkeep in the game, well, again, maybe play it at somebody else's house before you buy in for $200 or $300. So there you go. Fighting Fantasy Adventures. I mean, this is a very simplistic dungeon crawl-esque style feel where you're going through a pre-constructed deck laying it out in a slightly variable manner depending on how you play out the mission each time. But the combat is just line up and attack. And again, it's going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to be more like a call to adventure, if you will, if you remember that game, where the engine building, you know, was sort of there. It just wasn't as heavy as you might like. And the same thing here with the combat and the modular dungeon crawl-esque feel. And it's not a horrible price when you go down here for $60, including all of the pledge content in the bundle. But is that really what you want? Is this lighter style crawl going to appeal to you? And, you know, crawlers tend to be heavier and heavier nowadays, so it's a nice breath of fresh air in a sense. But I also can see why the funding just isn't there, because also on crowdfunding, that's not as heavily, you know, weighed or desired, especially without the miniature driven side of things, which again, I have no problem with. Give them kudos for not going that way, because again, I think they're kind of superfluous, especially with this type of game in the first place. So there you go. That's the roundup of why you shouldn't back anything on crowdfunding. As always, again, nothing personal against any of these games, campaigns, publishers, people behind them. You know, people are putting out solid stuff. But as a consumer, you also have to look out for yourself too. I mean, you know, if you buy a whole bunch of games that aren't suited right for you, I don't care how high the marketing or how high the hype is or who endorses what, right? Like, it always has to be right for you. You don't buy things you think you're gonna like. You buy things that you know you're gonna like. And if you're having doubts, as I said in the video, if you have doubts, chances are you're better off waiting, picking up at retail or trading for it. There you go. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, though, I'm going to do this for some retail as well. Not sure if that's going to look exactly like, you know, the month of August, the month of September, like here's all the new stuff coming out, but don't buy it because of X, or if it's going to be more like when I talked about the Gen Con stuff, right? Like, don't buy this stuff because XYZ, especially post-convention, because that's a whole nother conversation. As I read somewhere else online as well prior to this, that I, you know, have been spouting for a while, bookmark those Gen Con games. Bookmark the hottest of the Gen Con games right now and come back to them in 6 months. And check them out in 6 months. Check them out in a year. Because you know what? If they're really that good, 1, they won't be going anywhere. 2, they'll still be being talked about. 3, there's going to be more availability. Or 4, somebody, like I just mentioned, right, is not going to like it. Invariably, no matter how good it is, somebody's always not going to like it. And you'll be able to pick it up for cheaper than what you could get right now, even if you went straight retail and didn't get scalped for any reason whatsoever, right? So, food for thought. Preaching to the choir, of course, because if you made it this far in the video, you've heard me say most of those things before. Stay classy. Old man shouting at the clouds on his front lawn. I love this channel. Don't take yourself too seriously. You won't make it out alive. Do other people do that? I don't know. Like, I feel like all the channels recently, like, everyone's super serious when they talk about games, board games on their channel. They're like, we got to stick with board games and we got to talk about board games and... I don't know. Maybe I'm just making it up. I'm projecting, probably. That's probably what I'm doing. I'm good at that. This is what you get. You want more of this? Sign up for my Patreon. They get some of this a couple times a month in the background. They get some real sass and some real humor. Although, I'm not really that funny, am I? See you around.